Hi there everyone, Scott Nicholson here with an exciting announcement. I wrote a book! Ta-da! Everyone Plays at the Library, Creating Great Gaming Experiences for All Ages. This book came out at the end of June 2010. I'm excited about it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about it before moving on to today's show. So the book's published by Information Today. Who would be interested in this book? Well, librarians, of course, those people volunteering in libraries, but also if you are running any sort of a game program for a church, for a community center, for a school, any place where you're facilitating a gaming program, this book will help you do a better job of it. The book's not only about board games, but also about video games, role-playing games, big games, game shows, all sorts of game experiences. And it's not just for kids, it's for kids, for teens, for adults, for seniors, and for intergenerational gaming experiences. Now you may be thinking, well, none of that applies to me, but here's a thought. Have you thought about volunteering your time to a local library to help them start a gaming program? Because a lot of libraries are interested in this, but they need volunteers, they need help. And so what you could do is actually buy this book and donate it to the library along with your assistance to help them get a gaming program going. That's enough of that. Let's get on to the show. Hi there and welcome to Board Games with Scott. This is a regular video series where I take board games and explore aspects of them, hopefully helping you to identify some games you haven't seen before or just learn more about the board gaming hobby. On this show, I'm going to be looking at a specific mechanic that's used in a number of games, and that is rolling dice to get resources. Now what does that mean? Well, in a lot of games, traditional board games, we're familiar with dice. You roll dice, you move your mice. That's what you do in a lot of board games. Roll dice, move around a board, and the dice dictate how far you move. But in some games, they've actually taken dice to different places and using them in different ways. Now, we're going to step aside from that for a minute and talk about the concept of resources. Now, a lot of these games in today are about resource management. And the idea is that you get resources, you combine those resources, you trade those resources, you make new things out of those resources that helps you improve in the game. Sometimes you can make things out of a few resources for a short-term benefit or make things out of a lot of resources for a long-term benefit. And you got to balance doing all of that with trading and exchanging and things like that. Some games have used different ways of using dice to get you those resources. So in some games you're dealt the resources out on cards, in other games there's other ways of getting them. But what I'm going to focus on today are 4 games that use dice in different ways to help you get those resources. Using the dice in different ways forces you to think strategically in different ways, or not think strategically at all and just hope that luck works out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk about 4 games. First we're going to talk about the Settlers of Catan. Settlers of Catan is the game that have brought a lot of people into the hobby of these modern board games, or designer board games. Many times they're called designer board games because the designer's name is on the box. It's a game that originated in Germany, but is over here now. And it was one of the best known games where you roll dice in order to get resources. I'm also going to be talking about Kingsburg, which is a game where each player is going to roll dice to get resources, and you do that through an interesting method of claiming resources. I'm going to then talk about Stone Age, which is a game where it's a worker placement game, which I haven't done a show on yet, but I will down the road, where you're using your workers to go out and get resources, but it's controlled by dice. And then I'm going to talk about a new game, Macau, which uses dice to get resources in a very interesting way. But they've all got the basic concept. You're going to roll dice in some way dictating who's going to get what resources. So let's jump right into Settlers of Catan. So the first game I'm going to talk about, and one that many of you probably already know, is the Settlers of Catan. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Settlers of Catan on this show. I'm going to talk about Simply Catan. Simply Catan was put out by a company called Simply Fun, and the idea of Simply Fun is it was a party-based distribution network for games. The idea is that you would sign up as a Simply Fun consultant, you would get some of their games, you would hold a board game party, and then people would buy games from you, and you would make money off that, or they could sign up as a Simply Fun consultant of their own and hold their own parties, and you would make some money off of that. The games were very well produced. They were nice games. They're nicely made games. And so I was a Simply Fun consultant for a little while. What I found, though, is that their games varied from pretty good to pretty bad. And so I would hold a Simply Fun party, and I'd start doing Simply Fun games. And then I would say, you know, this is probably not the best game for this situation, and I'd go get something that wasn't Simply Fun. And I said, you know, maybe this isn't going to work out for me. So It used to be you could only get games through their distribution network, but now you can get them more easily. So Simply Catan, the way that it works and the way it's a little bit different is it puts all of the land tiles on these hexes. Now in Settlers of Catan, each of these hexes are individual, and you make the board each game in a large hexagon with these individual hexes. But in Simply Catan, you have the hexes set up, they're double-sided, they're different on each side. So it's a very fast setup. Also, there's nice little components. You've got nice molded plastic roads with three-dimensional detail. You've got nice villages and nice cities with, again, a lot of good detail. Nice stuff there. You've got these robber barons, which are nicely sculpted. Things are nice, heavy-duty, big, chunky cardboard. But the way that you roll for resources, in case you haven't seen the Settlers of Catan, is as follows. So this is the board for Simply Catan. One thing I like about it is it has printed on this frame the reference of what things cost, which is very nice. By the way, the reason why it's called Simply Catan is because there's an easier version of the game built in that it allows you to play only to 7 points, and you don't use any of the special development cards. And it ends up making the game play about half an hour, and it's a good introduction to the game of Settlers of Catan. But you can also play the full Settlers of Catan with this set. I like this set quite a bit. Now, in Settlers of Catan, the way it works is you're going to roll the dice, and whatever number comes up on the total of the 2 dice is going to determine who gets resources. Now, the way it works is, let's say I have this here, I'm the red player, I have this village, which means if a 4 is rolled, then I get the resource corresponding to this space, which is wheat. If a 2 is rolled, I get the resource corresponding to this space, which is wood, and if a 6 is rolled, I get this space, which is sheep. And so the blue player will get some resources if those numbers are rolled. Orange gets resources if these are rolled. So if a 4 is rolled, then both orange and red are going to get some resources. And so at the start of every player's turn, you could get resources. It all depends upon what number comes up on these dice. Now, one thing that they've done that's very nice in this version, and they've done in other versions as well, is they've put little dots under the number. And that tells you how commonly this number is going to come up on the roll of 2 dice. Because unlike the roll of 1 die, which has a probability distribution curve of this, the roll of 2 dice has a probability distribution curve of this. And of course, the middle point is wherever Scott doesn't happen to have anything. At least that's how it feels. No, the reality is the middle point is the 7. And in this game, if you roll a 7, nobody gets anything. And in fact, that's where these bad boys come into play and they cause some trouble. So your strategies then in dealing with this, there's 2 strategies. One strategy is to try and put your stuff on the same numbers so that you have some big payouts that happen and you're able to build a lot. There's a danger to that, though, in that this game penalizes anyone that hoards a lot of cards. So if you get too many cards because your numbers come up before your turn happens and then someone rolls a 7 on the dice, you get penalized. Another strategy is to try and cover the spread. It's kind of like craps, you know. Do you want to try and score on a lot of different numbers, or do you want to score big when a few numbers come up? You can make sure you have a lot of different numbers, which means you're constantly getting a few resources here and there. That may be a more efficient strategy, but you're not going to get that big payout every once in a while that can be really happy when you get a big mitt full of cards, and then your turn comes up and you ha 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 ha. Anyway. Now, some people get frustrated by the dice in this game. If they happen to roll 4 a lot, then these 2 players are going to be benefited and blue is not. There's some ways around that. There's ways to use cards instead of the dice. You can buy cards that allow you to simulate the dice roll, and then every so often there's a reshuffle card. It's a way to help control the probability a little bit so it comes out more like the normal distribution curve. But a lot of people don't bother with it. Just play with the roll of the dice and see what happens. Now, the next game I'm going to talk about is Kingsburg. Now, Kingsburg is a game that came out a few years ago. I like it quite a bit, actually. It's a game about collecting resources and using those resources to build buildings with different special abilities, which then help you deal with some of the situations in the game more effectively. And so the way the game works is you're going to use this board, and you're going to decide if you want the money or the mob. Wait, sorry, wrong game. You're going to use the board to get resources. Each player has one of these boards in front of them, which indicates the buildings they can build. The buildings have different prices, which require resources. So to build the statue, you need to have 2 lemons, or gold pieces, I guess. But they look like lemons to me. There's 3 resources in the game: lemons, wood, and stone. And you're going to get that by playing things on the board. The way you're going to get resources is you're going to roll dice and use the dice to claim advisors, and it shows at the top of each advisor what resources they give you. Now, at the start of the turn, everyone's going to roll their own set of 3 colored dice, And then you're going to set turn order based upon the total on the dice. And what will happen is when it comes to your turn, you can spend your dice to claim an advisor. Now, the way it works is, let's say this person rolled a 3, 3, and 6. Now, this person can either put all 3 of these together, which totals 12, and put it on the person on 12, and they're going to get this, which is 2 resources of any type, and one of these little chits, which lets you add 2 to a dice later on in the game. Or the person can choose to just split these up and say, well, I'm going to put these 2 together and add them up to a 9 and claim the 9. Now, the person will then hang on to this blue die for later on, and the next player can go. And they say, oh, okay, I'm going to add mine together. I have 13 total. And so I could, again, claim the 13. Now, the higher up you're able to go, the better the resource payout. So you've got to decide, are you going to split them up and try to get a 6 and a 4 and a 3, or are you going to add them all up and go for 1? One of the other tricks is that only one person can be on a square. So if I say, well, I want to get the 6, the 4, and the 3, that would help me, and I put it on the 6. And then Mr. Smarty Pants Green over here sees what I'm trying to do, and he claims the 4. Well, now I'm stuck. I've got a 3 and a 4, which means I'm either going to put them together over here on the 7, or I'm going to put the 3 and lose the 4 die because I can't put it on the board. Or if I had one of these from a previous turn, I could use it to add 2 and put it on the 6. But, oh, I've already got something on the 6. Bad case for me. And so a lot of what's going on in the game is you're looking at other players, you're seeing what they could claim, and you're making decisions about whether you want to put everything together for something big or you want to spread your dice on the small stuff. This game has a lot of things that let you fix the dice. It's got a lot of different things like these. You get extra white dice. You've got skills and abilities that let you twiddle with the dice. And so while you're rolling dice for resources, you're competing for those resource slots, but you've got a lot of ways to adjust it. So this is kind of in the vein of a worker placement game. And these dice are your workers. So you have 3 workers that can go out and get your resources for you. They can all work together and go for something big, or you can split them up and have them get smaller stuff for you. But for another worker placement game, let's take a look at Stone Age. Next, we're going to talk about a game called Stone Age, or Stone Age, dude. I don't have a copy of it to show you because, well, I don't like the game. Oh my gosh, Scott doesn't like a game and he's talking about it on Board Games with Scott? Yeah, that's right. In this version of Board Games with Scott, sometimes I'll talk about games that I don't like, but that have a mechanic that's important to talk about in the context of these other mechanics. Now, Stone Age is a worker placement game, and what that means is you have a bunch of workers, and on your turn, you're going to put workers out on the board, and they're going to do stuff for you. They're going to get resources, they're going to make more workers in the breeding hut, they're going to claim cards and things like that. And so what's going to happen is if you want to get resources, you put your workers out on circles that are affiliated with specific resources. So if I want to get gold, I'm going to put workers on the circles that are affiliated with gold. And then what happens is for each worker I have on a space, I get to roll a die. And if I roll high enough, I get the resource. So gold, it's the most valuable resource, means if I roll a 6, then I get a gold. If I don't roll a 6, I don't get anything. So what'll happen is I'll push out a whole mass of workers trying to get one lousy gold bar because it's what I need for whatever I'm trying to do. And I roll a bunch of dice and I don't get a 6, I don't get bupkis. And that makes me sad. Now, there are ways to mitigate that. There are tools you can get in the game which allow you to adjust the dice and adjust the rolls on the dice, and that can help out. But for me, I found I really did not like the dice rolling mechanic in this worker placement game. If I need to get a gold or a wood or a stone or whatever, I want to put out a guy and make sure I can get the thing. But it's still got an interesting way of rolling for resources in a way that's not guaranteed, and you can pay off big or you can get nothing at all. So finally, let's talk about Macau. Macau came out in 2009, and it uses dice in order to get resources. And you're going to use those resources for different things. You're going to use those resources to hire people, and the people cost different numbers of resources as shown on the card. You're also going to use those resources to claim spots in the city, and it shows you there what you have to spend in order to claim a spot. And you can also use the resources to sail your ship around the map and deliver goods. And so you're going to use these resource cubes in a lot of different ways. But the way you get the resource cubes is quite interesting. Now, what you're going to do is at the start of each turn, one player is going to roll these 6 dice, and everyone's going to use the roll of the dice. So everyone has a wheel like this in front of them, and what the wheel indicates is when you're going to get resources. So what will happen is when the turn begins, I will be rotating this wheel 1 step clockwise. Ding! And I will get whatever is here. But before we do that, I get some extra resources. And so what you do is you roll the dice and you look. So I got a purple 1, I got a blue 2 and a red 2, there's a green 3, and a black and gray 5. Now, everyone gets the same dice. Everyone makes this decision at the same point. And what's going on is I'm deciding, all right, do I want to put a purple cube on the space labeled 1, meaning I get it this turn. That's what the 1 purple would let me do. Or do I want to put 2 red cubes on the space labeled 2? That's what using this dice would let me do. That would let me put 2 blue cubes on the space labeled 2. That would let me put 3 green cubes on the space labeled 3. That would let me put 5 black cubes on the space labeled 5. Now you actually do get to take 2 of these dice worth of cubes and put them on the board. So you don't take all 6, you're just going to pick 2. So the idea is that if you put out more cubes, you're going to get them later on. So you either are putting out a few cubes that you're going to get to use right away, or you're going to put out more cubes that you're going to use later on in the game. Now you're penalized if you have no cubes available to you in a turn. So sometimes you have to do something like this just to make sure you're not going to get penalized. Now the way that you will claim anything is you have to have all of those cubes on the same turn. So cards that have 4 different colored cubes are actually very difficult to pull off until right at the end of the game. Most of the cards thankfully don't do that. Most of the cards have some combination, maybe 2 different colors of 2 of one and 1 of another. And so you can plan ahead. And you're going to get these cards during the game and you're going to use those to plan what you want to take. One of the frustrating things about this game is that if your dice don't come up, you can't get the color combinations you're trying to get. And you're penalized if you can't play these cards by the end of the game. One thing that helps you in the game is you get nearer to the end of the game, you're going to rotate some of the dice facings. And so in turn 8, any 6s become a 1. And that's because you wouldn't have 6 more turns. And so you get more dice that show a 1. In turn 9, any dice that are 5 or 6 show a 1. So as the game gets closer to the end, you tend to be able to get the color combinations you need for these types of cards, but then you've lost the ability to use them throughout the game. So that's one of the challenges. This is a pretty interesting mechanism, actually. The chancing, do you take a chance on doing stuff immediately, having the abilities of these cards and being able to claim stuff quickly? Do you put stuff off and then have big, massive turns later on? That's the balance you're always making with Macau. That's 4 different mechanics on rolling dice for resources. The Settlers mechanic, where you claim specific numbers and everyone goes off the same dice roll and you get resources when your number comes up. You've got the Kingsburg mechanic, where you're going to spend dice to claim specific numbers just for a turn, and they're dice that you have rolled and you block other people from getting those numbers. There's Stone Age, where you're going to send workers out and hopefully roll the dice that you need to roll in order to get resources. And Macau, where everyone's using the same pool of dice and you're having to make decisions whether you want to get a few resources now or many more resources later. What's interesting is none of these games are using dice in traditional ways. None are using dice to move your pieces around a board. Now what makes these games interesting is you're rolling more than one die. If you were only rolling a single die, then each spot would be equally likely to come up, and you'd really have no reason to make that decision. You'd say, well, I'm going to roll 1 through 6, and it'll be like picking a number on the roulette table. You're just picking a number. But if you're rolling 2 dice like in Settlers, then you've got a curve, and you can say, well, 6, 7, 8 are more likely to come up on these dice than other numbers. So I may want to fight for having spots on those numbers. Those may be important places to be. Now, one of the things that these games teach you is the concepts of probability, and you internalize them because you're interacting with them frequently. And so if you're a teacher, you're trying to help people, trying to help kids learn about probability, I take a look at some of these games. Even something like Settlers helps you understand how rolling 2 dice makes some numbers more frequent as compared to rolling 1 die, which means they're all going to be the same. And that helps you if you decide to head out to a casino and help you understand probability. You can decide, hey, look, it's roulette. All of the bets are equally bad, so just randomly throw your chips on the table, because that's the strategy. So that's the end of this episode of Board Games with Scott. If you enjoyed this, you can find more over at boardgameswithscott.com. I'm also a voice on the On Board Games podcast, which you can listen to over at onboardgames.net. And so that brings us to the end of this episode. I will see you in another episode of Board Games with Scott. Take care and bye-bye. If you're on Twitter or Facebook, you can keep up with me there. I have one feed for my life and my games and things like that, and a second feed for miniature game reviews. Come and join me. I'm also going to be talking about what's next? Kingsburg, okay. So what happens is each player rolls the dice. Okay, ideally, they're all going to roll their own dice. And so it's interesting when you take multiple dice. I dropped my die. In school, you probably had various probability exercises. You know, are you going to take one of these three choices? I'll take one away. Now, should you switch or not?